The next topic that we're going to talk about is pricing. That's the third component of marketing mix. Um, Basically, what we're going to talk about is that how do these companies set prices of the products. We're going to talk about pricing strategies, basically. And this is a combination of chapter 13 and 14 in the book. I've tried to combine them and only take out the important information that we need to discuss and put them all together in this chapter or topic. So, steps in setting prices. We're going to, as I said before, we're going to talk about how do these companies set prices for their products. So, when you're trying to set prices, there are certain steps you need to follow. Starting off with step number one, which is identify pricing objectives and constraints. So you need to identify your pricing objectives. That is, those objectives can be profit. Is your pricing objective to make profit? Is your pricing objective, do you want to set a price so that you can make profit? Do you want to set a price so that you can increase your sales or achieve a certain market share? Or do you want to set your prices so that you can survive? So, what are your pricing objectives? That's what you have to identify first. What are pricing objectives? These involve specifying the role of price in an organization's marketing and strategic plans. So, what is the role of price in your organization? As I said before, is it making profit? Is it achieving a certain market share? Or is it survival? Or is it something else? So, what is that? That's what you have to identify first. Now, what is profit? You might probably already know about this. Is total revenue minus total cost. That's the profit equation. So once you have done that, once you have identified your pricing objectives, you need to identify pricing constraints. And pricing constraints can be demand for the product and brand. Is there a demand for the product and brand? These are your constraints, because based on the demand, if it is low demand, then you have to set your price accordingly. If it is high demand, then you might have more flexibility. So demand for the product and brand can be a pricing constraint. Newness of the product or stage in the product life cycle. We discussed about the stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Based on which stage your product is in, you have to decide on the pricing. If it is a new product, then you have your own pricing constraints. You might want to go for skimming, or you might want to go for price penetration. So penetration pricing. So depending on, that doesn't mean that you have to, when we say constraints, we don't mean that we have to have low prices. We only mean to say that there are certain constraints that you have to keep in mind. You have to keep in mind that if you're new, then you might want to set your prices high, or you might want to set your prices low based on whatever your strategy is. Next is single product versus a product line. If it is just a single product, or if it is a line of products that you're offering, depending on that, you have to set your prices. Then cost of producing and marketing the product have to be kept in mind, because remember, we have to make profit, we have to run our business, we have to sustain. So, and that's why it depends on what is the cost of producing the product and marketing the product. And competitive forces. What is the competition doing? What are other organizations who are your competitors? What are they doing? How have they set their prices? You also have to keep that in mind. So you need to look at those forces. You need to look at that external environment and decide on what price you want to set. So pricing constraints involve factors that limit the range of prices a firm may set. So you have a range of prices that you have to follow because of these pricing constraints. Step number two is estimate demand and revenue. Now, the fundamentals of estimating demand are the demand curve, which consists of consumer tastes, price and availability of similar products, and consumer income. So your demand will be based on the demand of your product will be based on consumer tastes, right? What is the taste of the consumer? What does the consumer want? It can also be based on price and availability of similar products. So the demand of your product is going to be based on the availability and price of other products that the consumers can go for. That is going to impact your demand. The demand is also going to be based on consumer income, right? Based on your income, based on consumers' income, uh, the demand is going to be impacted. And we're going to talk about demand factors. So we're going to talk about first what a demand curve is, and you might have seen this before, but it's a graph relating the quantity sold and price. So we can see that on the x-axis we have quantity, and on the y-axis we see price. So a general idea is that as the price goes up, and you can see that from right to left, so as the price goes up, the quantity sold will go down. So as you're going to increase the price of your product, the quantities that you will be able to the quantity of products that you'll be able to sell will go down. So you can go from right to left in that on that graph. So which shows that the maximum number of units that will be sold at a given price. The curve shows the maximum number of units that will be sold at a given price. So you look at the curve and you see, let's say it just in the middle of the curve, if you look there, if you hypothetically put a dot over there, you see that that's the price. If that's the price of the product, this is the quantity that you're going to be able to sell. So that's a demand curve that shows the quantity sold, relationship between quantity sold and price of the product. Next is demand factors. These are factors that determine consumers' willingness and ability to pay for goods and services. Now, there can be many factors that make the consumers buy those products and services or pay a certain amount of price for goods and services, and that's the demand factors. And this can be anything. Um, these are related to how much does the consumer want to pay, or how much is the consumer able to pay for those goods and services. For example, if we want to estimate demand for Newsweek, okay, and set a price, we'll look at the demand curve for Newsweek, okay, and we can see on the x-axis we have quantity again, and in the y-axis we have price per unit. So if we set and forget about what's written movement along demand curve right now, but if we set our price per unit as $2, you can see that the $2, the quantity that will be demanded per year will be 3 million units of Newsweek. And if we reduce our price from $2 to $1.5, the quantity demanded will grow from $3 millions to 4.5 millions, and so on. So we go to D1 and we see that our price is 50 cents and our quantity has increased to 7.5 million units. So that's how a demand curve works. It shows that when you reduce the price of your product, your demand is going to go up. The quantity that is going to be demanded is going to go up. or vice versa. So you look at movement along demand curve. That's what we will look at now. So it has moved from point 1 to point 2. So quantity has changed from Q1 to Q2 by decreasing the price from from $2 to $1.5. And it goes along the curve. You can see that there's always a movement along that demand curve. Now, what happens is, based on demand factors that we were talking about earlier, it may happen that based on the demand factors, if you offer your product at $2, you're initially able to sell only 3 million units of the product. But if the based on the demand factors, the demand curve can shift from point 1 to point 3, meaning that you have kept the price same, which is $2. Your demand can increase, the quantity that is demanded can increase from $3 to $6. If that is the case, everything moves beyond. So your initial curve goes from point 1 to point D1, but your new demand curve, because you started off at selling 6 million units, then your new demand curve will completely shift as 3.3 to point D2. So there can be a shift in demand based on various demand factors. So you have the initial demand curve, you have shifted the demand curve, and now you have a new demand curve, and that can occur. That can happen because of different demand factors. Now, total revenue, and you might already know this, is the total money received from the sale of a product. So the money you sell a product, the money that you receive from the customer is your total revenue. So total revenue becomes unit price, the price that you're selling it at, times the quantity that you have sold. And the formula can be TR, or equation can be TR is equal to P times Q. Total revenue is equal to price times quantity sold. Very simple. Now what we're going to try to understand is price elasticity of demand. So price elasticity of demand is the percentage change in the quantity demanded relative to a percentage change in price. So what we were when we talked about demand curve before, and if you can only look at the dark line over there on the graph, don't look at the light line, just look at the dark one which says elastic demand. So if we look at this demand curve, you started off with $2.75, right? That was your price here on this graph. So that's 2.75. And if your price is 2.75, you're not able to sell anything. So you basically go from 2.75 to 2.5, almost around 2.5, and then you're able to sell 1.5 million units of the product. Then again, if you reduce your price from 2.5 to $2, you are able to sell 7.5 million units of the product. So the demand is very elastic, which means that by just reducing the price by 50 cents, that is from 2.5 to $2, you were able to increase the demand by 6 million units, that is 7.5 minus 1.5. So you were able to increase the quantity sold by just reducing the price by 50 cents. And this is elastic demand. However, now if you look at the lighter line over there, which says inelastic demand, inelastic demand is when you reduced your price from 2.5 to 2, that is just 50 cents, again, same, you were able to reduce or increase your quantity sold from just 6 million units to 7.5 million units. So your change in quantity sold wasn't much with the reduction in the price. So that's an inelastic demand. So basically this elastic and inelastic demand, whatever is happening over there, this is called price elasticity of demand, which is the percentage change in quantity demanded relative to a percentage change in price. And what is an elastic demand? As we saw, this is change in price leads to bigger percentage change in demand. You just make a small price change and it's going to lead to a bigger percentage change in the quantity demanded. The inelastic demand is change in price leads to a smaller percentage change in demand. That is, you increase or decrease, whatever, depends however you're looking at it. If you increase the price by 40%, you see the demand was only reduced by 10%. So that's an inelastic demand. Now, the step number 3 is to determine cost, volume, and profit relationships. And we're going to just go through quickly through the total cost, fixed cost, and variable cost. These are the fundamental cost concepts. Fixed cost is the sum of the expenses of the firm that are stable and do not change with the quantity of a product that is produced and sold. So, for example, if you're opening up a manufacturing plant, you need to rent a building. You need to pay the salary of your employees. You need to pay for insurance. You need to pay your electric bills. You need to pay your water bills. You need to pay, for the overall equipment that you're using. You need to pay for that. These are all fixed costs, which means that doesn't matter. And let's just talk about the building, okay, just to simplify everything. So if you are only looking at the building, you're paying a certain amount of rent for the building. Now, it doesn't matter if you're manufacturing one unit in that building or you're manufacturing 1,000 units of your product in that building. You have to pay the same amount of rent. That's fixed costs. Some of the expenses of the firm that are stable and do not change with the quantity of a product that is produced and sold. So similarly, you have to pay your executive salaries. We're talking about executive salaries. The executive salaries are going to remain the same whether you produce one unit or you produce 1,000 units of the product. So these are fixed costs. Variable cost is the sum of the expenses of the firm that vary directly with the quantity of a product that is produced and sold. For example, as the quantity sold doubles, the variable cost also is going to double. So if we talk about now direct labor or the material used, so we're talking about raw materials. If you are going to produce one item or one unit versus if you're going to produce 1,000 units, you will require raw materials for one unit versus for 1,000 units. So your cost associated with the raw materials is going to increase as you increase the number of products produced or sold. So that's a variable cost. The sum of expenses of the firm that vary directly with the quantity of a product that is produced and sold. Now, the total cost is a sum of fixed cost and variable cost. So this is the cost that is associated with producing and marketing of a product. And it's the equation you can see there, total cost is equal to fixed cost plus variable cost. Next, the break-even analysis. And we're going to talk about break-even point when we discuss the analysis and how to calculate that break-even point. We're going to look at the break-even chart and applications of break-even analysis. So break-even point is the quantity at which total revenue and total cost are equal. So if we look at that graph over there, on the x-axis we see again quantity sold, and on the y-axis we see sales. So look at the graph over there. Your fixed cost, we're going to look at fixed cost first, the dotted line that you see over there. So your fixed costs remain the same. Remember, it doesn't matter how many units you have sold, the fixed costs remain there. You have to pay the rent of the building. It's going to be the same. Doesn't matter if you sold one or you sold 1,000 units of your product. So fixed cost remains the same. Now let's look at the variable cost. Variable cost increases as you increase the units that you are selling, the quantity of products that are sold. So it starts off with 0 and then goes up and up and up as the quantity increases. Now you need to total them together, and that's going to give you the total cost, which is starts off with just from where the fixed cost is, and then the line goes parallel to variable cost because you're adding the fixed cost and the variable cost to get total cost. Now if you look at total revenue, your total revenue is 0 in the beginning. Just give me just a minute. So where the total revenue line intersects your total cost, that is the point where you start making profit. Until then, you were just incurring losses because you still had to pay for fixed costs, even though you're not paying for variable costs much, but you still had to pay for fixed costs until you reached a point where your total costs equaled your total revenue. So that's the point, which is break even point, is the quantity at which total revenue and total cost are equal. And after that point, as you can see, the green shaded area is the profit. You start making profit after the break even point. Now, break-even chart is exactly that chart that we were discussing right now. It's a graphic presentation of the break-even analysis that shows when total revenue and total costs intersect to identify profit or loss for a given quantity sold. So here it was hypothetical, but a break-even chart would be a one which has real numbers in there and which can show graphically that what is the point where you'll be able to start making profit. Now, the step 4 is about selecting an appropriate price level, and we're going to discuss this in next topic.